We seem to live in a world where it's common to boast about one's exploits, even to the point of how big one's hands are. I never thought I would see the day when the presidential debate would devolve to how big one's hands are. But it did. Do you remember Muhammad Ali? Do you remember when Howard Cosell would try to interview Muhammad Ali when he was a boxing champion? And Muhammad Ali would constantly speak over Howard Cosell and remind everyone, if you didn't already not know it, that he was the greatest. He says, "I am the greatest." He certainly was probably the greatest boxer of his time. But we remember Muhammad Ali not so much for his exploits inside the boxing ring. We remember how he handled life outside of the ring when he got the debilitating disease Parkinson's, and how he handled it with grace and humility. Our Old Testament reading speaks of greatness. The greatness of Naaman, the commander of the king's army from Aram, which is modern-day Syria. Now, Naaman was a great commander. He defeated Israel and Ahab in battle. His army is responsible for killing Ahab, being an instrument of God's justice. Except Naaman, for all his greatness, is suffering from a debilitating disease. He has leprosy. Now, leprosy in biblical times could be something as a skin disease called psoriasis, which isn't fatal, or leprosy could be contagious and be fatal, like Hansen's disease. The Bible in biblical times didn't make a distinction between psoriasis and Hansen's disease. They all lumped it under leprosy, which meant that Naaman, for all his greatness, had to exercise his authority from a distance. He suffered the indignity of being an outcast, one who was so great. His slave girl, a slave girl from Israel, she was taken in a raid, and she now serving Naaman's wife. The slave girl takes pity on Naaman and his conditions and says, if only he could meet the prophet from Samaria. And the prophet from Samaria is Elisha. He would be able to do something about Naaman's leprosy, I'm sure. Well, Naaman's wife tells Naaman, and Naaman tells the king, and the king says, I'll write you a letter, and I also will give gifts of gold and silver and clothes. And so Naaman appears on the doorstep of the king of Israel with the gifts and the request. And the request is, I have sent my servant Naaman to you for you to heal him of his leprosy. And the king rightly rips open his clothes because he knows that he is not God. He does not have the power to command life out of death. Oh, kings have the power to command death. And they do it all the time. But he doesn't have the power to command life. out of death. Only God can do that. And the king is convinced that the king of Aram is setting him up. Because if he can't heal Naaman, he'll then blame him, and it will be a pretense to invade Israel. Remember, Naaman has killed his father. The one on the throne in Israel is the son. Can you understand his anxiety? But evidently, Elisha has spies in the king's court, because word comes that the king is all out of sorts. And so Elisha sends word to say, send Naaman to me, that he might know there's a prophet in Israel. Now, as you read this, you would notice that there's something strange about that. Send him to me that he might know. Typically, what the prophet would say, that he might know the God of Israel who has the power to save. But that's not what he said. Send him to me that he might know there's a prophet in Israel. Did you hear the boast? Usually prophets boast in the Lord. Paul says, may I never boast except in Jesus Christ and the power of him crucified. And here we have Elijah boasting in his power to save. Interesting. Well, Naaman arrives at the prophet's doorstep with his entourage, with the chariots and horses, and he expects the prophet to get out and welcome him because he's a man of great importance. But what does the prophet do? He sends a servant. He sends his messenger to deliver the message. Go and wash in the Jordan River 7 times. Naaman takes this as a personal affront because courtesy would have you, hospitality would demand of you to go out and welcome Naaman, but Elisha doesn't do that. He does not follow the formal courtesy. He almost treats Naaman as if he has leprosy. And he's afraid of getting it. He's doing what everyone else does to Naaman. Stand at a distance. He doesn't regard the importance of Naaman as a personal affront to his ego. Naaman is upset not only because the prophet doesn't dare come out and address him, but he's upset by the prescription by which Naaman is to be healed. Go wash in the Jordan River 7 times. Naaman knows that the rivers of Damascus are far cleaner than the Jordan River. If it wants me to do something as simple as wash in a river to be clean, why not do it in the rivers of Damascus? You see his prejudice. He feels as though his country and their rivers are far superior to Israel and its river. What could be going on in this story? You know what I think is going on in this story? I think before Naaman can be healed of his leprosy, he first must be healed of his prejudice. Did you hear what I said? Before Naaman can be cleansed, he must be cleansed of his prejudice, his bias towards situations that he deems are beneath him, and situations and people he deems that are beneath him. I wonder if there's a lesson for us in that. I wonder if we need to be healed of our prejudice before we can see God at work in our midst. What do you think? Sometimes we have prejudice that we're not even aware of, that we're blind to. Let me give you an example from the real world. The YMCA. The YMCA has created a poster, and this is a poster that was put up in Fort Morgan, Colorado, and other cities in Colorado. The YMCA had a poster up about proper pool behavior. And they had examples of proper pool behavior and improper pool behavior. And it so happens that those children that were caught doing proper behavior were white. It so happens those children that were depicted as doing improper pool behavior were people of color. They didn't even realize their bias until someone posted it on the internet, on their Facebook, and it went viral. Sometimes we're not aware of our prejudice, but our prejudice can keep us from seeing God at work. Sometimes we even have to examine why we do what we do. We might be doing it for a good reason, like, for example, volunteering to serve at the community breakfast. We have a lot of people in our church that serve at the community breakfast, and that is a wonderful thing. But sometimes we might assume that the people whom we're serving really have nothing to give us. We're there to serve them, and they're there to receive from us. But that would be farther from the truth. One of the great experiences of the community breakfast is to realize that every human being is a beloved child of God. The image of God is inside of every human being, regardless of race, regardless of religion, regardless of social or economic standing. Every human being is an occasion to encounter God in our midst. One of the great things about serving at the community of breakfast is getting down and having a meal with our guest. And I've done that on a number of occasions, and so have many of our volunteers. And one of the things that they discovered is the people whom we serve and whom we are served by are not people without faith. We think that maybe we're doing it to bring Jesus to them. Do you know what I've discovered? As I sat down and had breakfast with them, they began telling me about God and about how God has been good to them, and testify about daily bread. They're living the Lord's Prayer, and they're thankful. And suddenly, I encounter God through them. I thought I was there to give comfort to them, but I found that they have come and given comfort to me. I was the receiver, and they were the giver. Sometimes our prejudice can keep us from seeing God in our midst. Another interesting aspect about the story are the servants who were responsible in many ways for Naaman's healing. Think about the servant girl. Do we know her name? No. Think about the servants of Naaman who reminded him, had the prophet asked you to do something difficult, would you not have gladly done it? How much more should you do something simple as wash and be clean? Again, the servants are unnamed. Paul says, may I boast in nothing except Jesus Christ and Him being crucified. Crucifixion was an act of humiliation. And yet, when humanity was doing its worst to God, God was doing God's best for humanity. Jesus died for our sins that we might be raised to a new way of life. Jesus has demonstrated for us what greatness really looks like. What greatness really looks like isn't the number of people who serve us. What greatness really looks like is how we serve. The Son of Man came not to be served, but served and gave His life for the salvation of many. Think about the people who have served you with grace and dignity. They're probably unnamed, but yet, Paul tells them, never tire of doing good. I had a maid. Her name was Mary. And she was our maid for the first 10 years of our life. And every time Mary would come and begin her chores, I and my siblings would run up to her, and she would take from her pocketbook a piece of gum. It was clove gum, if you must know. And it was wonderful. And Mary would make our lunch, and Mary would sit down and talk to us. And I thought Mary was a member of our family. I wasn't old enough to realize that in the South, servants are never members of the family. They're there to serve the family, but they're never members of the family. I, as a child, didn't understand that. Or maybe I understood it better than adults. Remember what I just said about prejudice? Sometimes our prejudice keeps us from seeing God at work. Mary was a beloved member of our family. We just didn't recognize it, at least the adults didn't. Think about the teachers who have served you and who helped shaped you. What I would like for us to get out of this story is the need for each one of us to be healed of our blind spots, where our prejudice keeps us from seeing how God is at work reconciling the whole world back to His family, the one family called the human race. May we be healed of our prejudice. May we learn that greatness is not in who serves us, but in how we serve. Even if it goes unnoticed. God notices. And one day God promises to say, good, and faithful servant, enter into the joy I have prepared. May we know that day. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.